Welcome to True Tales of Love and Loss. Today's heart-rending tale is more than just a story. It's a real-life saga unfolding across the vibrant streets of San Francisco and the rolling hills of Oakland. With the author's blessing, we've titled it, Wife Wanted an Open Marriage, Now She Regrets It Deeply. Every moment is drawn from raw, authentic memories destined to stir your soul. Join us as we dive into part one of a husband's journey through love, heartbreak, and redemption in the Golden State. Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. The sun dipped low over the San Francisco Bay, casting golden streaks across the water as Daniel Harper gazed out from his apartment window in the Mission District. The faint hum of traffic along Valencia Street mingled with the chatter of pedestrians below. Hipsters heading to artisanal coffee shops, families pushing strollers, and the occasional street musician strumming a guitar. It was a typical Thursday evening in late September 2023, and Daniel felt a quiet contentment settle over him. At 32, he had built a life he was proud of, a steady job as a graphic designer, a cozy two-bedroom apartment with exposed brick walls, and most importantly, a marriage to his college sweetheart, Emily. They'd met 12 years ago at UC Berkeley, in a crowded lecture hall during a Sociology 101 class. She'd been the shy girl in the back row, sketching in the margins of her notebook, while he'd been the slightly awkward guy who tripped over his own feet trying to ask her out. Their first date had been a disaster. Spilled coffee at Phil's Coffee on Shattuck Avenue and a missed BART train. But they'd laughed it off, and that laughter had carried them through a decade together. 10 years, 8 of them married. And Daniel still believed they were each other's first and only, something rare and beautiful in a world obsessed with fleeting connections. Emily padded into the living room, her auburn hair tied back in a messy bun, wearing one of Daniel's old Cal sweatshirts. She carried a glass of Napa Valley Chardonnay, her latest obsession since a weekend trip to wine country the previous month. "You're staring out there like you're solving world hunger," she teased, settling onto the couch beside him. "Just thinking," Daniel replied, turning to her with a smile. "About us. How we got here." She raised an eyebrow, sipping her wine. "Oh? And where's here, exactly?" "Here," he gestured vaguely at the apartment, the city beyond. "Married, happy, still figuring it out. I don't know. I just feel lucky." Emily's smile faltered for a split second, so brief he almost missed it. She leaned over, kissing his cheek. "Me too," she said softly, but there was a distant note in her voice that Daniel couldn't quite place. That night, as they lay in bed, the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds, Daniel noticed Emily was quieter than usual. She'd started a new job 3 months ago at a tech startup in Silicon Valley, commuting from San Francisco to Palo Alto each day. At first, she'd complained about the corporate culture, all glass-walled offices and ping-pong tables. But lately, she'd been more animated, talking about her coworkers, especially a group of women she'd befriended. Daniel had encouraged her to branch out. Emily had always been reserved, and he was glad she was finding her footing. But tonight, something felt off. "You okay?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah," she murmured, rolling onto her side. "Just tired. Long day." He nodded, letting it go. But as he drifted to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that a crack had appeared in their foundation. Small, barely visible, but there nonetheless. By early 2024, the crack had widened. Emily's new friends, single women in their late 20s and early 30s, some divorced, others perpetually dating, had pulled her into a world Daniel barely recognized. She started going out more. Happy hours at the Tipsy Pig in the Marina District, late-night karaoke sessions in Japantown, weekend trips to Lake Tahoe with the girls. At first, Daniel was supportive. "You deserve to have fun," he told her one evening as she applied mascara in their tiny bathroom. "I'm glad you're making friends." But the fun began to erode their routine. Emily came home later, her laughter tinged with gin or tequila, her stories about her nights out growing vaguer. Their intimacy dwindled. She'd always been the more passive one in that department, but now she was either exhausted or not in the mood. Daniel tried to talk to her about it one rainy Sunday in February, as they sat in their favorite diner, By Right Creamery's soft serve melting between them. I just feel like we're drifting, he said, poking at his waffle cone. You're out all the time, and when you're here, it's like you're not here. Emily sighed, pushing her spoon into her mint chip ice cream. I'm just enjoying myself, Dan. Don't you want me to be happy? Of course I do, he replied, frustration creeping in. But what about us? I miss you. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. But promises, Daniel would later realize, were fragile things. The tipping point came in March, when Emily's company hired a new manager, Ryan Kessler. He was a transplant from Seattle, all sharp suits and sharper charisma, with a reputation for turning struggling teams around. Emily mentioned him casually at first. Ryan said this. Ryan fixed that. But soon her anecdotes veered into personal territory. She's so good at handling conflict, she'd say, or she's got this way of making everyone feel heard. Daniel noticed how her eyes lit up when she spoke about him, a spark he hadn't seen in months. One night, as they drove home from a movie at the AMC Metreon, Emily turned to him, her voice tentative. Dan, do you ever regret not, dating more before we got together? He frowned, keeping his eyes on the road. Why would I? You're all I've ever wanted. She hesitated, then said, I just wonder sometimes what it'd be like to experience more. The words hung heavy in the air, and Daniel's stomach twisted. Is this about Ryan? He asked, unable to stop himself. No, she snapped too quickly. It's not about anyone. It's just a thought. But it wasn't just a thought. A week later, over dinner at their apartment, takeout from Burma Superstar, she dropped the bombshell. What if we opened our marriage, she said, avoiding his gaze as she picked at her tea leaf salad. Just to try something new. Spice things up. Daniel nearly choked on his samosa. What? That's not us. You've never even hinted at anything like this. I know, she admitted, finally meeting his eyes. But I feel like I missed out, I don't want to lose you. I just want to explore, safely, together. He wanted to scream, to ask if Ryan had put this idea in her head, but her pleading look stopped him. Against every instinct, he agreed, setting rules. No bringing anyone home, full transparency. He told himself it was temporary, that she'd get it out of her system, but deep down, he knew he was playing with fire. Chapter 3, The Unraveling. For the next year, their marriage became a strange, fractured thing. Emily dove into her new freedom with an energy that stunned Daniel. Dates at swanky bars in Soma, one-night stands she'd recount with a mix of excitement and guilt. Ryan, predictably, became a fixture in her stories, evolving from a friend to someone special. Daniel, meanwhile, tried to keep up, going on a handful of dates arranged through apps. But it felt wrong, hollow. He'd sit across from women at cafes in Oakland or bars in Berkeley, forcing smiles all the while thinking of Emily. Then in January 2025, he met Soo Jin. She was a 30-year-old illustrator who'd moved from Busan, South Korea, to Portland, Oregon, before landing in San Francisco for a freelance gig. They met at a gallery opening in the Dog Patch, her dark eyes catching his across a room full of abstract paintings. Conversation flowed effortlessly. She was whip-smart, with a dry humor that reminded him of his college self. Her smile was electric, and when they ended up at her loft near Pier 70, Daniel discovered a passion he hadn't known was possible. Soo Jin made him feel seen, desired, alive. Emily noticed the change. At first, she teased him, "Someone's smitten." But as his dates with Soo Jin multiplied, her tone shifted. She started coming home early, cooking elaborate dinners with recipes from her mom's old cookbook, dropping by Daniel's office in the financial district with homemade bento boxes. She even initiated intimacy again, something she hadn't done in years. But Daniel couldn't reciprocate, not fully. The purity of what they'd had was gone, replaced by a numbness he couldn't shake. One night in late February, as they sat on their couch overlooking the city, Emily broke. "I want to close it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "This was a mistake. I regret everything. I just want us back." Daniel stared at her, his chest tight. What changed? He asked. She confessed. Her friends had planted the seed, feeding her stories of their wild escapades. Ryan had encouraged it, turning an emotional affair into something physical once the marriage opened. It was thrilling, she admitted, like speeding down the Pacific Coast Highway with no brakes. But it wasn't real. Not like us. Us? Daniel laughed bitterly. You killed us, Em? She sobbed, clinging to him as he held her in silence, unsure if he was comforting her or saying goodbye. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The fog rolled in thick over San Francisco that Monday morning in early March of 2025, blanketing the city in a damp gray haze. Daniel sat in the passenger seat of Emily's Prius as she navigated the winding streets of No Valley toward their first marriage counseling session. The appointment was at a small office on 24th Street, tucked between a yoga studio and a vintage bookstore, with a sign that read Dr. Laura Mendez, LMFT, in understated lettering. Emily had found her online, drawn by glowing reviews about her ability to navigate complex relational storms. Daniel wasn't sure what to expect, but the knot in his stomach told him this wouldn't be easy. Inside, Dr. Mendez greeted them with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, professional but guarded, like someone who'd seen too many marriages crumble. She was a petite woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun and a notepad resting on her lap. The room smelled faintly of lavender, courtesy of a diffuser on the windowsill, and the walls were lined with abstract art in soothing blues and greens. It felt like a deliberate attempt to calm the chaos Daniel and Emily carried with them. So, Dr. Mendez began, crossing her legs and clicking her pen, why are you here today? Emily didn't hesitate. She launched into the story like it was a confession she'd rehearsed 100 times, her voice trembling but resolute. I ruined everything, Emily said, her hands twisting together in her lap. We've been together for 10 years, married for 8, and I thought I needed more. I convinced Dan to open our marriage, and it was the stupidest mistake I've ever made. Dr. Mendez nodded, scribbling something on her notepad, her expression neutral. Let's unpack that. What led you to that decision? Emily took a shaky breath, glancing at Daniel. He stared at the floor, the beige carpet blurring as he braced himself for what he knew was coming. It started when I got this new job in Palo Alto, she said. I worked at a tech startup, and I met this group of women. They were all so free, single, divorced, dating around. They'd talk about their adventures, hookups in Vegas, weekend flings in Santa Barbara, and I started wondering if I'd missed out. Dan was my first boyfriend, my only boyfriend, and I guess I got curious. Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd heard bits of this before, but hearing it laid bare like this, in a sterile room with a stranger taking notes, made it sting anew. Dr. Mendez tilted her head. Curiosity isn't unusual. What turned it into action? There was this guy, Emily admitted, her voice dropping. Ryan, my new manager. He came in last spring, and he was different, confident, charming. My friends noticed how he paid attention to me. Little things like bringing me coffee from Blue Bottle or asking my opinion in meetings. They egged me on, said I should see where it went. You're young, they'd say. Live a little. Did anything happen between you and Ryan before you opened the marriage? Doctor Mendez asked, her tone steady but probing. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting to Daniel. He looked up now, meeting her gaze, and saw the guilt pooling there. Not physically, she said finally. Not exactly. We'd text a lot, late at night, after work. It got flirty, and once, after a team happy hour at the Battery, we didn't sleep together, but we crossed a line. We were alone in his office, and we touched ourselves, in front of each other. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. The room spun for a moment, the lavender scent turning cloying. He'd suspected something, but hearing it confirmed, picturing it, hit like a punch to the gut. You told me nothing happened, he said, his voice low, dangerous. You swore it was just an idea you had. I know, Emily whispered, tears spilling over. I lied. I didn't want to admit it, to you or myself. Ryan said it wasn't cheating since we didn't touch each other. He made it sound artistic, almost, like we were just appreciating each other. I bought into it because I didn't want to feel guilty. Dr. Mendez raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clenched. And after we opened it? What then? Emily sobbed, wiping her nose with her sleeve. It got physical, with Ryan mostly. A few others, too. One-night stands in San Jose, a guy I met at a bar in the Mission. It was like I was drunk on it, this freedom. But it wasn't real. It wasn't us. Us, Daniel echoed, his laugh hollow. There's no us left, Em. You tore it apart. I know, she cried, sliding off her chair to kneel in front of him, clutching his legs. I'm so sorry, Dan. I see it now. What we had was special, and I threw it away. I quit my job last week. I blocked Ryan, cut off those friends. I'll do anything to fix this. Dr. Mendez cleared her throat, setting her pen down. Emily, let's give Daniel some space to process. Chapter 5. The Fallout. The drive back to their Mission District apartment felt endless, even though it was only a 15-minute trip from No Valley. The fog had thickened, shrouding the city in a damp cocoon, and the Prius's headlights barely cut through it. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, while Emily sat beside him, her sniffles punctuating the silence. The weight of her confession hung between them like a third passenger. Ryan, the late-night texts, the illicit encounter in his Palo Alto office. It replayed in Daniel's mind on a loop, each detail sharpening the blade of betrayal. When they parked on Guerrero Street, Emily reached for his arm as he turned off the engine. Dan, please say something, she whispered, her voice raw. He pulled away, staring at the dashboard. What do you want me to say, Em? That it's okay? That I can just forget it? No, she said, her lip trembling. I need to know you don't hate me. He turned to her then, his hazel eyes dark with exhaustion. I don't hate you. I don't know what I feel anymore. That's the problem. Inside, the apartment felt alien, like a museum of a life they'd once lived. The exposed brick walls, the framed photo from their Yosemite honeymoon, the mismatched thrift store furniture. It all mocked him now. Emily hovered near the kitchen, wringing her hands. I'll make dinner, she offered. That pasta you like, with the pesto from the farmer's market. I'm not hungry, he said, dropping his keys on the counter. He headed for the couch, but she followed, desperate to bridge the gap. I quit my job, she blurted. I told you in the session, but I mean it. It's done. I called HR last Friday, right after I realized how stupid I'd been. And I blocked Ryan, all those friends too. I deleted everything, texts, emails, their numbers. I'm done with them. Daniel sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples. Good for you, he said, his tone flat. But that doesn't erase what happened. I know, she said, kneeling beside him again, a habit she'd picked up since her regret took hold. But I'm trying. I'll keep trying. Whatever it takes. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time that night. Her auburn hair was a mess, her green eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She was still beautiful, but it was a beauty he couldn't reach anymore, like a painting behind glass. I need to tell you something, he said finally. Sujin, she's not just a fling. She's been there for me. She makes me feel like myself again. Emily flinched, but she nodded, biting her lip. I know. I saw it. The way you light up when you talk about her. I hate it, but I get it. I drove you to her. The honesty caught him off guard, and for a moment he softened. But then his phone buzzed. A text from Sujin. How'd it go? Want to grab a drink at Vesuvio later? He stared at it, torn, then locked the screen. Emily noticed, her shoulders slumping. The next day, Daniel called his older brother Matt, who lived in Oakland and owned a handful of rental properties across the Bay Area. I need a place, he said, pacing the apartment while Emily was out buying groceries. Another peace offering he hadn't asked for. Somewhere cheap. I can't stay here. Matt didn't hesitate. I've got a one-bedroom in Temescal, near Telegraph Avenue. Tenant just moved out. You can have it for $500 a month. Don't argue. I'm not taking more from you. Thanks, Daniel said, relief washing over him. I'll move in this weekend. That Wednesday, they returned to Dr. Mendez's office for their second session. The fog had lifted, replaced by a crisp blue sky, but the clarity didn't extend indoors. Emily started again, her voice steadier this time. I helped expose Ryan, she said, pulling out her phone to show Daniel a string of emails. One of the girls from work, Claire, she got messed up with him too. After I quit, she hooked up with him, had a pregnancy scare. He turned on her, and she told me everything. We sent it all to HR and his fiancée up in Seattle. He's toast. Dr. Mendez nodded approvingly. That's a bold step, Emily. Taking accountability can shift the power dynamic. Daniel frowned. Expose him? What else did he do? Emily hesitated, then spilled it. Claire overheard him talking to another guy at the office. Some jerk from sales. Ryan said I was easy, that I was just a distraction before he marries his fiancée. He even said he felt bad for you, Dan, but you snooze, you lose. I heard it myself one night when I was leaving late. It hit me then, what I'd done, what he really was. I threw up in the parking lot and drove home, crying your name. Daniel's stomach churned. So that's what changed your mind? Not me, not us, just him being an asshole. No, she protested, grabbing his hand. It was everything. Losing you, seeing how happy you were with her, it all crashed down. I never stopped loving you, Dan. I was an idiot, chasing something I thought was love. It wasn't. You're the real thing. He pulled his hand back. I'm moving out, he said, the words heavy but final. To Oakland. I need space. I'm done with this counseling too, at least the marriage part. I'll do individual sessions instead. Emily's face crumpled, but she choked back a sob. Okay, she whispered, if that's what you need. As they left, Claire called Emily, her voice frantic through the speakerphone. He's gone off the deep end, she said, threatening me, saying I ruined his life. My boyfriend found out about the scare, dumped me. I thought you saved your marriage, Em. Tell me how. Daniel didn't wait for the answer. He grabbed his jacket and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him like a guillotine. Chapter 6. The Choice. The Temescal apartment smelled of fresh paint and possibility when Daniel moved in that Saturday in mid-March 2025. It was a modest one-bedroom on 51st Street, just off Telegraph Avenue, with hardwood floors that creaked underfoot and a bay window overlooking the Oakland Hills. Matt had left a six-pack of Lagunitas IPA in the fridge and a note on the counter. You've got this, little bro. Call if you need me. Daniel cracked open a beer, the bitter, hoppy taste grounding him as he unpacked his life from a handful of cardboard boxes, clothes, books, his sketch pads. The rest stayed in the Mission District with Emily, a past he wasn't ready to fully sever. The first week was quiet, almost too quiet. He'd wake to the hum of buses on Telegraph, sketch designs for freelance clients, and walk to Piedmont Avenue for coffee at Timeless Coffee, where the baristas knew his order. Black, no sugar. But Emily's absence echoed louder than he'd expected. She texted daily. Apologies, please, updates about her progress. I started therapy today, one read. I'm reading this book about rebuilding trust. Can I send it to you? He'd reply with curt acknowledgments. Good, sure, but kept his distance, the numbness still a wall between them. Sujin changed that. She showed up on his second Friday in Oakland, a paper bag from H Mart in her arms, her dark hair tied back with a scrunchie. I brought bulgogi, she announced, kicking off her sneakers at the door. Figured you could use a home-cooked meal. They cooked together in the tiny kitchen, her laughter filling the space as she teased him for burning the rice. Over dinner, cross-legged on the floor with plates balanced on their knees, she asked about the counseling session. It was a mess, he admitted, swirling his beer. She cheated before we even opened it. Emotionally, mostly. But there was this thing with her manager. I don't know how to trust her again. Sujin's eyes softened. You don't have to. Not if it doesn't feel right. He looked at her, the way her presence steadied him, and felt a flicker of something new. Hope, maybe. They spent the night talking, then more, her warmth erasing the cold Emily had left behind. Over the next weeks, Sujin became his anchor. Weekend hikes in Redwood Regional Park, late-night drives across the Bay Bridge to watch the city lights, her sketches pinned beside his on the apartment walls. She made him feel like a man who could face the world, not a shadow of one who'd lost it. Emily, though, wouldn't fade quietly. She showed up unannounced one Tuesday at his old office in the financial district, a bento box in hand, sushi rolls and tamagoyaki, a clumsy nod to Soo-jin's influence. "I just wanted to see you," she said, standing in the lobby of the brick and glass building, her coat damp from the spring rain. "I miss you, Dan." He took the food but not her hand. "You can't keep doing this," he said. "I need space." "I know," she replied, tears welling. "But I'm fighting for us. I'll fight forever if I have to." Her desperation gnawed at him, but it didn't pull him back. It pushed him further away. Matt, sensing the strain, suggested a divorce lawyer the next day over beers at Drake's dealership in uptown Oakland. "She's not letting go, man," Matt said, tapping his glass. "You need to protect yourself. I know a guy in Emeryville, sharp, fair. Meet him." Daniel did, the following Monday. The lawyer, a no-nonsense man named Greg Torres, laid out his options in a sterile office overlooking the bay. "No kids, joint assets minimal. It's straightforward," Greg said, scribbling notes. "You can file anytime. Mediation's an option if she cooperates." Daniel left with a folder of paperwork and a decision he hadn't yet voiced. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, on a rainy April evening. He'd gone back to the Mission apartment to grab his winter coat from the closet. Soo-jin had planned a trip to Lake Tahoe, and Oakland's mild spring hadn't prepared him for snow. Emily was there, sitting on the couch, surrounded by their wedding photos, her eyes red and puffy. She leapt up when he entered, nearly knocking over a frame from their Yosemite trip. "Dan," she said, rushing toward him, "I didn't know you were coming. Stay, please. I need to talk." He sighed, setting his keys down. "I'm just here for my coat." But she blocked his path, her hands trembling. "I've been thinking. We could move. Mendocino, maybe. It's quiet, beautiful, just us, like it was meant to be. We could start over." He stared at her, the desperation in her voice cutting through his numbness. "And what about Soo-jin?" he asked. "I can't just ditch her. She's been there for me." Emily's face twisted, a sob escaping. "What does she do for you that I can't?" "Tell me. Dan, what does she give you that I can't?" Her voice rose, shrill and broken, loud enough to rattle the neighbors. "Whatever it is, I'll do it. I'll be it. I'll change. Everything." He shook his head, stepping back. "If you still don't know after all this, Em, then that's the answer. It's not about what she does. It's who she is. She didn't break me. You did." She lunged for him, clutching his shirt as if he'd vanish. "Don't say that. Don't leave me. I love you. I've always loved you." "I loved you, too," he said, gently prying her hands off. "But it's gone. I'm filing for divorce. You need to let go." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing incoherently as he grabbed his coat and left, the rain washing over him as he walked to his car. The door shut behind him, a final note in a song that had played out. In June 2025, Daniel stands on a cliff in Big Sur, the Pacific Ocean crashing below, the wind tugging at his jacket. The divorce is underway, Emily a fading memory. He hasn't heard from her since she signed the papers, though Matt says she's moved to Sacramento to be near family. Soo-jin's in San Francisco, finishing a mural project, but they've talked about a future. Maybe Portland, maybe something else. He's not whole yet, but he's free, the horizon open before him, a blank page he's ready to fill.